So with that group highlighted that you had created in that previous step, click the pull-down menu again for the Create and select Create Project. Now, it is very, very important. You do not click the OK on the lower right-hand corner of this window until I tell you to. And the reason is because there are certain things that cannot be changed once a project is created. So I need you to follow along with me while we create and visit each one of the sections of this project before we actually create it underneath that project group. Now, the first thing you need to do is name your project. I'm going to call mine Rich's Project. Now, something to keep in mind. Do not put alphanumeric characters, even spaces, at the beginning or the end of either a project group name or a project name. And the reason I say that, and notice that you can put it in between, because I've just put in Rich's with a apostrophe and then a space between Rich's and project. You can do that inside the name of the project. But if you attempt to do that on either the beginning of the project name or the end of the project name, all of those types of special characters, including things like the space bar, or let's say the ampersand sign, or the number sign, those all call upon a database to do a certain type of formula. Since all we are doing is creating names to projects and project groups, that doesn't make sense in this context, and it will not allow you to create that project with those special characters either at the beginning or at the end. Immediately below the name of the project, notice it starts filling in the name of the project with the backward-facing slash, and it says the name of that project. Immediately below that, there is a little check mark that is not yet selected. I want you to select that for me, please, to include the project groups in the project path. This shows us that this project is going to be created underneath or inside of the project group we created in the previous exercise. Also notice in this right-hand panel that there are two different tabs here. There's a Properties tab that we're currently looking at now. There is also a CDS Settings tab that we're going to visit right now. So before you click OK again, select that CDS Settings tab immediately to the right of the Properties tab. And notice that the system has already started creating locations for methods, sequences, results, and sequence templates, as well as report templates. You cannot change any of these locations. Those are all created by the software, by the algorithms within the software itself. You cannot change the destinations for either methods, sequences, results, or sequence templates. I know that it looks like you could because the browse key immediately to the right of each one of those fields looks like it's active. But I will warn you that if you attempt to use that browse key and browse to any of the other project locations, when you finally select the OK, it's going to throw up an error telling you you cannot create your project pointing to these locations. So then a logical question will be, well, why the heck is that browse key available? Well, unfortunately, it's been an ongoing discussion with R&D. We have asked them to remove those browse keys or at least make them gray, but they have said that in the future, they will be available, so they didn't want to have to change the code in the future. Again, a little bit of a disagreement between those of us out in the field and our R&D colleagues. But there is one place that you can change the location, and that is in that final project option, the report templates. I can change where I look for my default reports. Chances are you're going to want to share those reports across a whole myriad of projects instead of having to either copy them across the projects or having to recreate them within different types of projects. So instead, we can use that last browse in the report templates area. So select the browse to the right of that report template. it opens up where it says select a folder under the content management. Click the right-facing arrow to the left of OpenLab CDS 2.5, and then select the report templates, the second one down underneath that OpenLab CDS 2.5, and select OK. Again, this is the only place in a project where you can change the location of something. You cannot change it for methods, for sequences, for results, or for sequence templates. You cannot even change the plurality of the names of those folders. I can't just change the methods directory to method instead. It will not create the project. You'll get an error message thrown up. In the CDS settings tab, underneath the project options, there is an option to allow printing of unsaved processing methods and results. By default, in a compliant environment, which all of these have been installed as, that is deselected. That is because one of the edicts, especially for 21 CFR Part 11 compliance, is if I want to create a physical report, I have to have an electronic copy of the data that exactly matches that physical report. So by default, that is deselected. It's an option because there are other industries out there, chemical and petrochemical being two, where that's not important to them. They can actually print out a report and not save an electronic copy of data. They can opt into this by selecting that check mark. I don't want you to do that at this point in time. I want you to make sure that that is deselected. Immediately below that, there is a brand new button that has just appeared with OpenLab CDS 2.5. OpenLab CDS 2.5 has only been out now for about 6 weeks. Prior to that, that enforce method approval was not there. What this is a way to be able to force chemists to use only approved methods when they are either running instruments or doing data analysis. Again, this was not there prior to 2.5, which has been out now for about 6 weeks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because many of you probably don't have OpenLab CDS 2.5, but this is a perfect segue into segueing into what happens if I don't know what that enforce method approval is, and I would like to find out more information about it. Well, on your keyboard, when you're in this section of the control panel, select the F1 key on your keyboard. That's going to open up the OpenLab CDS Interactive Help and Learning module. Now, this opens it up in Internet Explorer, but it is an intranet web portal. It's on these virtual images themselves. At the bottom, it's going to ask you if you want to be able to allow blocked content. You do. Say select to allow blocked content. And then this looks at a certain section in the hard drive on the virtual image of where this interactive help and learning is. And it's context sensitive. That's why you want to be able to allow blocked content, because now you can see where you've got different hyperlinks to be able to go to different locations. So it's already opened up for me to add a project. I can then use my scroll bar on the right-hand side to cursor down. And one of the sub-menus here is to look at project options and then, for instance, to use the method labels. If I click on that blue huge use method labels, it pulls up for me an explanation of what these method labels are and how I can activate them and therefore how I can use them in my system. I cannot over-accentuate to you the importance of this OpenLab CDS Interactive Help. This should be where you go for the explanation of at least 95% of any of the questions that you have within your system. Now, if you still have this OpenLab CDS Help and Learning open, that's fine. In the upper right-hand corner of the box, I want you to select the minus because that's going to iconize that back down to the lower ribbon. And it brings us back to our control panel. Next, immediately below that enforce method approval, there is an audit trail settings. Now I want you to select the method tab in the audit trail settings. And notice that currently audit trail settings for the method have not been enabled. I'm going to go ahead and enable these audit trails by selecting to automatically enable the audit trail. And that's going to give me a dialog box in the middle of the screen. It says, once the audit trail has been activated, it cannot be turned off. Are you sure you want to continue? This is to prevent curious chemists like me, who might get in a really cool sample in the lab, but I might be afraid that it'll break my HPLC because it doesn't look like a great sample to run on my HPLC. If I had an option, I might be tempted to turn off all the audit trails so nobody could ever trace that back to me. That cannot happen in a qualified, compliant OpenLab CDS environment. Once the audit trail is turned on, it is turned on from that point forward and can never be turned back off. Now that said, let's say I've got a project that I start out using as an R&D person, and I don't necessarily need the audit trail turned on for my methods in R&D. Well, 6 months from now, I'm going to transfer that to QA/QC. They definitely want to have audit trails turned on. They can opt in 6 months from now then to turn on the audit trail, but once it's turned on, it cannot be turned off. So now we select OK here. And we're then prompted, we have two options for the audit trail. I can either prompt for a reason when saving, or I do not prompt for a reason when saving. This is one of the settings you can change after the fact, but this is going to require, if you prompt for a reason when saving, anytime you make a change in your method, it's going to require the user to put in the username, password, and a reason. Most of the time, I'm going to suggest that is not necessary. The detail of the audit trails for OpenLab CDS are so detailed that there is no real reason for you to have to put in your user login name, password, and reason, because everything in the audit trail is actually captured. Think of this audit trail as a videotape of what you're doing with your set of data. Instead of having to interactively do these things back and forth, instead, it's something that is automatically capturing everything that you were doing. To which some chemists will ask me, well, what about the why I did something? Well, the why is the easiest answer of all, because it made my data look the best that it could possibly look. So the why is really already established within any set of data. In this case, again, select Do Not Prompt for a reason. Next, go to the Sequence tab immediately to the right of the Methods tab. And once again, automatically enable the audit trail here. Once again, I'm given that confirmation. Once the audit trail has been activated, it cannot be turned off. Are you sure you want to continue? I'm going to select OK. And again, I'm not going to prompt for a reason when saving. And then finally, go to the Results tab immediately to the right of the Sequence tab, and notice that the audit trail has already been engaged here. And that's because these are all in a compliant environment. That means that from Agilent's perspective, the minimum compliance necessary when you're in a compliant workspace is to have the audit trail automatically turned on for all results. And once again, I'm going to make sure that I do not prompt for a reason. But notice, this is an example of what I was saying before. Once the audit trail is turned on, even though we are logged in as system administrators, we can't turn it off. Then immediately below that, I want you to go down to the sample custom parameters and compound custom parameters. These are additional types of information that you can both capture and then report on in your system. This is information that's not typically tracked by a CDS system. So for instance, let's say I have a lot number for each one of my injections in my sequence. I'd like to track that lot number, and I'd like to put it on an intelligent report when I get that report at the end of the day. Well, immediately to the right of that sample custom parameter, I select the Add button that creates a new line for me underneath that sample custom parameter. In the very first field underneath the sample column name, I double click inside of that, and I'm going to call this lot number. I'm going to keep the type as a text because it can be alphanumeric as a text. And I'm not going to put in a default value, nor am I going to make it mandatory at this time. I'll explain what those do in just a moment. Now, this is per injection in my sequence table. Now, an example of a compound custom parameter instead of per injection. This is going to be per named compound within a chromatogram. So let's say I have 4 different peaks of interest. Each one of those peaks has a purity factor associated with it. I'd like to be able to use that purity factor in a calculation of final concentration. So immediately to the right of the compound custom parameter table down below, I click the add button to that. And I'm going to click inside the first field underneath the name, and I'm going to type in purity. Now I know that this purity is not going to be a text. I want to use it in some type of a formula. So if I click that text field, it opens up a pull-down menu for me, and I can make this a numeric value. And once again, I'm not going to put in a default value or make it mandatory. I will explain what those things mean by going through a scenario that unfortunately, again, a very close friend of mine up in the Boston area got bitten by this. She was setting up a 100 injection run to run over the weekend. What she did not realize is that her manager had gotten to her project and had created a sample custom parameter that he felt was absolutely necessary. So he made it a mandatory custom parameter by selecting that mandatory flag. Well, she did not know that that had occurred. She set up her 100 injection sequence. It's a Friday afternoon. It's 4:30 in the afternoon. She submits her run to go, and it has a 30-minute equilibration time before the very first injection is done. Well, the system equilibrates for 30 minutes, and then at 5 o'clock, she's already halfway out to her weekend, but a dialog box of 100 big red X's appears, looking for this mandatory custom field parameter that was not filled in. And unfortunately, the system tried for 30 minutes to resolve that error, couldn't, and it errored out with a not ready timeout. There was a very, very unhappy chemist come Monday morning. So if you do decide that your custom parameters are mandatory, they must be filled in, please fill in a default value that will make sure that even though it wasn't the correct value for your set of data, a person will not lose a weekend's worth of runtime. Instead, when they print out their results and they have that mandatory custom parameter there, it might be the wrong value, but they can go back through and they can change all those values, reprocess the data, and they will not have wasted a full weekend's worth of work. And here especially, let's say I make my sample custom parameter mandatory. Well, it's a text field, so I can type in information here to help my chemist. I can type in for the default value, please fill in this sample custom parameter. If I have a really good chemist, they are going to see that on their printed out report, and they are going to know that's right, I have to go back and fill out this important information. If I have an overworked, over-haggard chemist, they might miss it, but then QA/QC is going to bring it back to their attention and go, what exactly is this that you need to fill out? Either way, it will prompt them to be able to fill in the correct information. Now, a similar thing can be done with a numeric value if I put in a numeric value here that doesn't make sense. So if I put in a mandatory flag for that numerical purity value, but I put in a default value of 0, chances are that 0 is going to be used in an equation. That means that my final concentration is either going to come out to 0 or infinity, depending upon how that is used. That is going to prompt my chemist to look for and change these values to the appropriate values. Now that we have visited the entire section of this project, now you can click OK, and it will create that project immediately below the project group that you had highlighted in the left-hand panel.